Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Mari. I'm one of the librarians at Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine, and I'm here today to continue reading Searching for Dragons by Patricia C. Wrede. This is the second book in the Enchanted Forest Chronicles, and it's published by Scholastic. We're going to pick up right where we left off with chapter 15, in which everyone argues. Where we just left off, Mendenbar and Cimarine had finally made it to the Enchanted Forest, along with the magician Telemaine, and they found a whole bunch of people waiting for them. They've just figured out where Kazul has been taken by the wizards, and now they're trying to decide, they've just found out that there's a cave, and they kind of know where the cave is. They're trying to figure out how to get there, how to get in. And that's where we'll start, with chapter 15, in which everyone argues. Willen's list was remarkably clear and well organized. Once they found the section headed Caves and Caverns near the Mountains of Morning, it was only a matter of a few minutes before they discovered the listing for the Cave of Stone Icicles, the only cave at the western end of the Pass of the Dragons. As Mendenbar had predicted, there was a back way into it. The tunnel started from the bottom of the Crystal Falls and wound around under the hills and the forest until it reached a crack at the rear of the cave. "This doesn't look as if it will be hard at all," said Cimarine. "Let's go." "Right," said Mendenbar. "This shouldn't take long. I'll be back in an hour or so. Willen take care of everyone while I'm gone. You know, refreshments and things." "Wait a minute," Cimarine said, her voice rising above startled objections from everyone else. "You're not going without me." "But I'm Kazul's chief cook and librarian," Cimarine said firmly. "It is my job to help rescue her." "I suppose so," Mendenbar said. "But all I'm going to do is sneak in, look at the wizards, and then sneak out again." "That's all you think you're going to do, but what if something goes wrong?" "Exactly," said Morwen. "You should have someone with you. Several someones, in fact." "I'm really good at sneaking," Crown Prince Jorlium put in eagerly, "and I want to see a dragon up close." "No, you don't," said Mendenbar. "Morwen, are you trying to tell me that you want to come along as well?" "No," said Morwen, looking sternly over the top of her glasses. "I'm telling you I'm going to come, whether you like it or not. Kazul is my friend. Besides, I want to crack at those wretched wizards." "We aren't going to do anything to the wizards until we know more about what we're up against," said Mendenbar, feeling harried. "Then how come you want all those buckets of soapy water?" Crown Prince Jorlium demanded. "Just in case," Mendenbar said. "This is only to find out what the wizards are doing and how many of them there are." "Which is precisely why I must accompany you," Telemaine put in. "Not you too." Telemaine frowned at him. "You don't seem to realize what a priceless opportunity this is," the magician said. "It's entirely possible that we shall be able to observe the Society of Wizards in the very act of casting their magic absorption spells. Since they are extremely secretive about their methods, this may be the only chance we have of studying their techniques." "It isn't worth the risk," Mendenbar said. "Not to you, perhaps," Telemaine told him. "I, however, intend to take full advantage of these circumstances. One way or another, I'm going to get a look at those wizards." He leaned the wizard staff against the wall and folded his arms stubbornly. "Yeah, and then we melt them," Crown Prince Jorlium said enthusiastically. "You are not coming with us," Mendenbar told him. "But I'm real good at sneaking," Jorlium said. "Tell them, Uncle." "He is," Prince Rupert said earnestly, "and I'll keep an eye on him so we won't get in your way." Mendenbar stared at him. "No, you won't, because you're not coming with me either. I'm going to sneak into the Cave of Stone Icicles by myself." "No, you're not," said everyone at once. Morwen's two cats glanced up and then went back to washing their tails. Mendenbar got the distinct impression that the only reason that they hadn't joined in the general outcry is that they thought it was beneath them to argue. "It is inappropriate for the King of the Enchanted Forest to embark on a mission to the King of the Dragons without a formal escort," Willen added. "You want me to take all these people along with me as a formal escort?" Mendenbar said incredulously. "Really, Willen?" "Not at all," the elf replied. "They are all persons of distinction, and it would not be suitable for any of them to take a position as a formal escort to your majesty. Properly, only those of your subjects already in your majesty's employ may make such a return. Due to your majesty's general dislike of formality, we have very few such persons available at present. What are you suggesting? Mendenbar asked with a sinking feeling. That I am the only possible person who can accompany your majesty in this capacity, Willen said. If he gets to go, so do I, Crown Prince Jorelium cried. Not without me, Prince Rupert said, setting his jaw. I don't know anything about this business with the dragons and the wizards, but Jorelium is my responsibility. Until I lose him in the forest, that is. And Kazul is my responsibility, Cimmerian said. Like it or not, I'm going to get a look at those spells, Tillman stated. Those wizards have caused me a lot of trouble with one thing or another, Morwen pointed out. I intend to cause them a bit of trouble back. It is necessary to your majesty's dignity that your majesty take a proper escort with you, Willen put in. Quiet, Mendenbar said. Everyone stopped talking. Willen looked utterly astonished. Jorelium had a wary expression, and Prince Rupert and Telemaine both looked mildly taken aback. Morwen's eyes gleamed approvingly behind her glasses, and Cimmerian looked momentarily startled, but then she smiled. Mendenbar took a deep breath. First things first. Crown Prince Jorelium. Yes? You are not coming on this expedition. You will stay here, at my castle, until I return. In the dungeons, just as you have requested. But it's not fair, Jorelium said. I didn't know then that you were going to go fight wizards. And that elf, Willen, is one of my people and a native of the Enchanted Forest, Mendenbar said. You aren't. Don't bother arguing. You don't get a choice. I'm the king here, remember? Jorelium gave him a sulky nod. Prince Rupert, Mendenbar went on, you were quite right to say that your nephew needs watching. You will stay here and keep an eye on him while I'm gone. Certainly, your majesty, Prince Rupert said with a relieved sigh, if you say so. I'm afraid I can't bring you with me either, Willen, Mendenbar said, turning to his steward. Somebody has to take care of our visitor, you know, and you're the only possible person. Willen hesitated, plainly torn. It is my duty to serve your majesty regardless of the danger. I appreciate your willingness to accompany me, Mendenbar assured him. I feel, however, that you would serve me better here. Now please take these two guests to the north-northwest tower and see that they get some refreshments. As your majesty commands, Willen said, bowing. He gestured to Prince Rupert and Crown Prince Jorelium and led them away. Well, that takes care of them anyway, Mendenbar thought, as they three vanished around a bend in the corridor and vanished from sight. The rest wouldn't be that easy. He looked over and saw Morwen, Cimmerian, and Telemaine standing side by side wearing identical expressions of stubbornness, and he sighed. He supposed he could accidentally on purpose forget to include them in the transportation spell, but somehow he didn't think that would stop him. Not when one was a witch, and one was a magician, and one an experienced dragon's princess. Don't even bother trying to talk us out of it, Cimmerian warned. You'll only waste more time. You're probably right, Mendenbar said at last. And anyway, I suspect I really should have some help along with me, just in case. Very sensible of you, Morwen told him. Yes, well, let's go get our buckets and go, Mendenbar said uncomfortably. The four of them collected buckets of soapy water from the castle footmen. Cimmerian and Telemaine took two each, but Mendenbar only took one because he wanted to keep one hand free in case he needed his sword. Morwen also took only one bucket. She did not explain, and her expression dared anyone to comment, but no one did. The footman left, removing Telemaine's staff along the way. Be sure you put it somewhere safe, Telemaine called after him. Mendenbar looked around one last time, checking to make sure that everything finally was ready, and then twitched the strands of power and transported them all to the foot of the Crystal Falls. They appeared on the slippery bank of a narrow stream. A little further on, the Crystal Falls poured in a shining curtain down the side of a sheer cliff of black glass. The water foamed and swirled at the foot of the falls, forming a small, restless pool, then rushed down the channel at their feet, dashing on to the deeper parts of the enchanted forest. The noise of the falling water was tremendous, and the air had a clean, sharp smell. Mendenbar looked around to see that everyone was still there and that no one had spilled the soapy water. He noticed without surprise that the two cats had come along, even though he had not specifically included them in the transportation spell. Cats were like that. Which way to the tunnel entrance? Cimmerian asked. She had to shout to make herself heard over the roar of the waterfall. Over there! Mendenbar shouted back, waving at a clump of fir trees near the foot of the cliff. "Watch your step!" "What did you say?" Telemaine yelled back. "He said, watch your step!" Cimarine repeated at the top of her lungs. Telemaine nodded, and they moved cautiously away from the water-slick bank of the stream. The cats had already moved out of range of the mist bellowing from the base of the waterfall. When the rest of the group caught up to them, the two cats gave Mendenbar deep looks of reproach, as if to imply that he should have had more sense than to set everyone down so close to such a damply uncomfortable spot. The tunnel entrance was a narrow crack in the side of the cliff, hidden beneath the clump of firs. The cats trotted through it and vanished into the darkness. Morwen gazed after them with a thoughtful expression on her face. "I don't suppose anyone remembered to bring light," Cimarine said, eyeing the crack with evident misgiving. Telemaine smiled and said 3 words that crackled in the air. A small globe of golden light appeared above his head. "I'll go first, so the rest of you can see where you're stepping," he said, smiling with a trace of smugness. "And what do you think will happen when we get near the wizards and their magic absorption spell gets a hold of your little glow ball?" Morwen said sharply. "You're not thinking, Telemaine." "I suppose you have a better idea." Morwen pushed her glasses firmly into place, set down her bucket of soapy water, and reached into one of her long, loose sleeves. She pulled out a small lantern and set it on the ground. Then she reached into the other sleeve, from which she pulled a flint striker and a long splinter of wood. Expertly, she struck a spark, lit the splinter, and then used the splinter to light the lantern. She blew the splinter out, stuffed it and the flint back into her sleeve, and smiled at the surprise on everyone's face. "I thought we might be needing this," she said, picking up the lantern and the bucket and starting for the mouth of the tunnel. "Hang on a minute," Mendenbar said. "I should go first. Would you give me the lantern, Morwen?" "Only if you don't dawdle," Morwen responded. "My cats are in there." "Of course. You come next, then, and Telemaine after you. Cimarine, you can come last. That way we'll have light between every 2 people." Cimarine did not look happy about these arrangements, but Mendenbar did not give anyone time to argue. As soon as Morwen nodded, he took the lantern and started into the crack. It was only wide enough for one of them at a time to edge sideways, and the ground was covered with shattered rock, which made the footing treacherous. Juggling the lantern and his bucket back and forth from hand to hand, Mendenbar tried to see what lay ahead of him while still giving Morwen enough light to follow. Progress was slow, and he was beginning to wonder whether the whole tunnel was going to be as narrow and difficult as this beginning. "Maybe we would have been better charging at the main entrance," he muttered to himself. After what seemed a very long time, but was probably only a few minutes, the tunnel widened. The piles of shattered rock became fewer and then ceased altogether. Mendenbar heaved a sigh of relief and stopped to let the others catch up. Morwen was the first. "Good," she said as she clambered over the last of the rock piles, balancing carefully to avoid spilling her buckets. "I was beginning to think this rocky stuff was never going to end. Any sign of my cats?" "It would be more reasonable to ask whether there are any signs of the wizards," Telemaine said, following Morwen into the wider part of the tunnel. There was a large wet spot down one side of his many-pocket vest. Apparently he had not been as careful with his buckets as Morwen. "I haven't seen a trace of the wizards," Mendenbar said, "but the cats have been by here." He pointed to 2 small trails of footprints leading down the tunnel. "Thank goodness that's over," Cimarine said as she emerged from the narrow section of the tunnel to join them. "Why are you all just standing here? The Cave of Stone Icicles is a lot further on." As this was undeniably true, they set off again. There was still not room for all 4 of them to stand in a line, but at least now they could walk 2 by 2 without difficulty. Somehow Cimarine ended up walking with Mendenbar in the front. Mendenbar was not sure whether to be glad or sorry. He enjoyed walking with Cimarine, even if they did not dare talk much. The wizards might have someone listening for odd noises. On the other hand, being in front meant that he and Cimarine were the ones that the wizards would attack first. And Mendenbar did not like the idea of anyone attacking Cimarine, although he knew that she could take care of herself. He had some time to consider this, for the tunnel was long and winding, but he found it hard to concentrate with Cimarine walking so close beside him. He discovered that he wanted to put his arm around her as they walked, the one carrying the bucket of water, not the lantern, but somehow that didn't seem like the right thing to do when they were supposed to be watching out for wizards. He had never met a princess like Cimarine before. He had never met anyone like Cimarine before. She was smart and brave and kind and loyal, and he liked her. In fact, he liked her a great deal. In fact, suddenly, The light around Mendenbar dimmed. He stopped and glanced over his shoulder. The little globe that had been hovering over Telemain's head had gone out. "Telemain," Mendenbar whispered. "I didn't turn it off," Telemain whispered back. "We must be getting near the wizards." Mendenbar nodded without surprise. The atmosphere in the tunnel felt dry and magicless, even though they were still in the enchanted forest. He could no longer sense the threads of power floating invisibly in the air. He swallowed, hoping he would not have to do any spells in a hurry. "Keep close," he whispered to Telemain and Morwen, and started forward once more. The tunnel bent sharply to the left and then the right, and without further warning opened into a forest of stone pillars. The glimmer of light showed between the stones, and they could hear a mumble of voices in the distance. Hastily, Mendenbar covered the lantern with a corner of his cloak, so that the only lit area was just in front of his feet. Simmerine dropped back. After a moment, she put her hand on his shoulder, and Mendenbar wondered briefly what she had done with the bucket. She gave his shoulder a brief squeeze to indicate that Morwen and Telemain had taken their places, and he heard her pick up the bucket again. Carefully, Mendenbar edged through the pillars towards the light and the voices. As they drew nearer, Mendenbar began to understand what the voices were saying. "I don't like this," grumbled one. "We've wasted too much time already. We should just take her outside and dose her with Dragonsbane. Leave her for someone to find." "Stop complaining, Dizen," replied a smooth voice, and Mendenbar frowned as he recognized Zemnar's fluid tones. "I have told you 100 times how foolish that would be." Zemnar went on. "I'm not going to tell you for the 101st. "He's right, though," another voice said. "Someone is going to notice us pretty soon, and then where will all our planning be?" "Someone already has," a fourth voice rasped. "What about those two this morning?" "A couple of adventurers," Zemnar said dismissively. "They don't matter." "They got away, didn't they? They tell someone what they saw." "They won't," Zemnar said. "How can you be so sure of that?" "Because of who they are." Zemnar gave a snort. "Can't you recognize a wicked uncle when you see one? He was probably here to drop the boy somewhere in the enchanted forest. He isn't going to tell anyone about us, and even if he does, what of it? Everyone knows odd things happen in the enchanted forest. His story will only be one more." Mendenbar was at the end of the stone columns, close enough to see the wizards if he peeked around a pillar. There were 10 of them, grouped about a small table on one side of an enormous cavern. Zemnar and the other two were seated. The rest leaned against the walls of the cave or stood in clumps close by. High above the wizards, hundreds of long, cone-shaped columns hung like stone icicles from the ceiling. 4 torches dangled from iron brackets on the wall, and a lamp stood in the center of the table, throwing shadows like dark fangs from the hanging rocks. Partway across the cavern, a pale golden glow cut across the shadows like a drawn curtain. On the other side of the glow was a dragon, her wings folded along her back, her eyes narrowed to slits. Mendenbar recognized her at once, even without Simmerine's hiss. She was the same dragon that they had seen in the magical window at the dwarf's house, Kazul, king of the dragons. Chapter 16, in which Mendenbar cleans up. Mendenbar blew out the lantern and set it on the floor. They didn't need it anymore anyway. They were near enough to see the light of the wizard's torches, even in the shadows. Carrying their buckets, Simmerine, Morwen, and Telemain slipped behind nearby pillars as another wizard came around the corner from the far end of the cave. "Most gracious and powerful High Wizard," he said, bowing to Zemnar. "We've checked everything at least twice. There's no one outside and no sign of anyone coming. The spell Zimnian felt before must have been some sort of normal variation." Behind the pillars, Mendenbar winced. The wizards had noticed his locating spell. Simmerine frowned and shook her head at him, but he wasn't sure what she meant by that. Morwen scowled at them both and put her fingers to her lips. "Possibly," Zemnar replied. "I don't want to take any chance, though. The king of the enchanted forest has a certain amount of magic, and we don't fully understand it. Call in a few more wizards, just to make sure." "If you don't want to take chances, we really ought to use the dragon now and get out of here," Dizen said. "I'm with you," the most recent arrival agreed. "Dragons make me nervous. Are you sure she can't get out?" "If she could, she would have done so right away," Zemnar said. "Don't worry about it. We've put the power of at least an acre of the enchanted forest into building that shield, and no one can lower it except us." "Are you sure?" the wizard persisted. "Take a closer look if you're not satisfied," Zemnar said, waving at the glow. "It is impressive," the wizard said. "But with a spell this new, how can you be positive? Say, what's that?" At their companion's change in tone, the wizard's head swiveled to look at Kazul. For a frozen moment, no one spoke. Then a wizard at the back said, "It's a cat." Mendebar glanced sideways in time to see Lauren shake her head and take a firmer grip on her buckets of soapy water. He grimaced. They only had 6 buckets of soapy water between them, and there were already 11 wizards in the cave. If it came to a fight, they would be badly outnumbered. "How did a cat get inside the shield?" another wizard asked. "It wasn't there yesterday." "It wasn't there a few hours ago," Dizen said. "Where did it come from?" "Spread out and search the cave," Zemnar commanded, "and bring in the dragon's bane. Someone is snooping." The dragons fanned out across the cavern and started towards the forest of pillars. There was no way that Mendebar and the others could get away without being seen, even if they had been willing to abandon Kazul to her fate. Mendebar drew his sword. Soapy water or not, he felt better with a weapon in his hand. As the first wizard reached the pillars, he jerked in surprise, then raised his staffs. But before he could release whatever spell he was planning, a shower of soapy water drenched him from head to foot. The wizard shrieked loudly. "Blast you 6 ways from next Monday!" he shouted as he began to melt. "This is the 2nd time you've liquefied me. May you and your pet dragon and your triple-cursed washwater turn purple with orange spots and fall down a bottomless pit." The other wizards stopped in their track. "It's Cimarine," one of them said nervously. "That's Princess Cimarine to you," Cimarine said, stepping out from behind a pillar. She held her second bucket in plain sight, ready to throw. "Stay back," Semnar ordered. "Blast her from a distance." "Cowards," Cimarine taunted, and ducked behind another of the stone columns. "Come and get me." It wasn't going to work, Mendebar told himself, taking a firmer grip on his sword. Zemnar was too clever to let his wizards chase Cimarine into the maze of stone. They would stay at a safe distance and throw bolts of power into the pillars till they destroyed the maze or killed everyone in it, or both. 3 more wizards came running in. Zemnar stopped them with a gesture. The rest of the wizards backed away from the pillars and lined up across the width of the cave. "Now then," the head wizard lifted his staff and pointed it at the pillar that Cimarine had ducked behind. "Like this." Mendebar felt magic swell around the end of the staff. An instant later, before he had time to reach for the magic himself, the spell shot forward and exploded, shattering the pillar and sending chips of rock flying everywhere, in all directions. "Ow!" Cimmerine's voice cried out from somewhere in the shadows. Without thinking, Mendebar stepped out from behind his pillar, bucket in one hand, sword in the other, into full view of the wizards. "Over here!" he called. If he could distract them for a minute, perhaps Cimarine could get safely behind another column. "Mendenbar!" For an instant, Zemnar looked thoroughly startled. Then he smiled nastily. "How nice to see you. I'd been hoping you would turn up so we could finish this little business at last." As he spoke, Zemnar stood forward and shifted his staff to point it at Mendenbar. Mendenbar raised his sword and stayed where he was. He felt magic building around the staff once more and decided not to wait to find out what Zemnar intended it to become. Instead, he reached out through the sword and touched the wizard's spell the same way that he had touched the magic threads of the enchanted forest. It was much easier to do here than it had been in the mountains of morning. The sword sopped up the spell in an instant. Mendebar could sense the channels of power Zemnar had been using to feed his spell, and he touched those tubes and pulled in. The sword obediently drank them all. "What are you doing?" Zemnar cried in astonishment, lowering his staff. His hair stood out around his head, as wild and tangled as the magical mess that he'd left on the floor of Mendebar's castle. "I'm stopping you," Mendebar said. His whole arm tingled with the power that the sword had absorbed. He could just think of the right thing to do with it. "And a good thing to do, too," Morwen said from several pillars over. "You're too greedy for your own good, or for anyone else's, for that matter." "I'm not greedy," Zemnar protested angrily. "I have every right to." "You're greedy, all right," Cimarine said from just behind Mendenbar, "and you wouldn't know what to do with all the power you wanted even if you got it. Just look at you. Your hair's like a bird's nest." Zemnar scowled. Mendenbar stared at him without really seeing him, trying to remember why Cimarine's words sounded familiar. "The gargoyle," he said suddenly. "Why didn't I think of that earlier?" "What gargoyle?" one of the wizards asked. "Never mind him," Zemnar said. "He's only trying to distract us. All together now. Blast them!" The line of wizards raised their staffs. Mendenbar grinned and twisted the mass of power in the sword, just as he had done 2 days earlier when he had grown tired of the gargoyle's complaints. Soapy water spurted out of the empty air in front of the wizards in a hard, fast stream, as if it were being pumped in through an invisible hose. The foaming spray washed over the entire line, thoroughly soaking them all. Puddles grew rapidly on the stones underfoot, and the wizards shouted and slid on the suddenly slippery floor. So several of them dropped their staffs to rub at their eyes, which had apparently gotten soap in them. But none of them melted. Mendibar felt a moment of panic. He had been sure that his magically created soap water would work just as well as the buckets they had hauled with them from the castle, but it didn't seem to be doing anything. The wizards would get themselves together any minute, and what would he do then? "Did you remember the lemon juice?" Cimmerian said in his ear. "Oh, right," said Mendibar. He twisted the power again, and another spray of soapy water, this time smelling strongly of lemon, squirted over the wizards. To Mendibar's considerable relief, they collapsed into gooey puddles, one after another. In another moment, there were no wizards left in the cave at all, only staffs, soggy robes, and a great deal of water and soap suds. Mendibar studied the puddles and then set his bucket of soapy water on the ground. It didn't look as if he'd be needing them anymore. He kept his sword out, however, as he didn't know how many more wizards might be outside. "Fascinating," said Telemaine. He moved forward and knelt at the edge of a puddle. "This mess appears to be mainly the liquefying agent." "It does?" Cimmerian asked. "He means it's mostly soapy water," Mendibar said. "And a good thing, too, or it would take forever to clean up," Morwen said. "Wizards are a nuisance, even when they're gone." "It's a pity it isn't permanent," Cimmerian said. "I'd like to get rid of that Zemnar once and for all." "Removing their staffs will delay their reappearance," Telemaine said. "I suggest we do so before we leave." "Good idea," said Morwen. She picked her way between puddles and began collecting the wizard's staffs. Telemaine went back to studying the puddle. Cimmerian turned to Mendibar. "Now if Kazul can just—" "Oh, no!" Mendibar followed Cimmerian's gaze. The glowing golden shield still blocked half the cavern, imprisoning Kazul. There was a long silence. Then Cimmerian said, "Telemaine, were those wizards right when they said they were the only ones who could take down the spell?" "What's that?" Telemaine said, looking up. "Really, must you interrupt so constantly? I'm never going to get anything finished at this rate." "But think of the interesting things you'll find out," Mendibar said. "The shield, for instance. Have you ever seen anything like it before?" "Not that you mention it. No," Telemaine replied, scrambling to his feet. "Let me look at it." "That was the idea," Cimmerian muttered. They all watched while Telemaine examined the shield. He walked from one end to the other and then put a hand gingerly against the glow and pushed. When nothing seemed to happen, he twisted one of his rings twice and touched it to the glow. "Can you get rid of it?" Cimmerian asked. "I don't know yet," Telemaine said. "I'm still checking the parameters of the primary enchantment." "Oh." The magician twisted a different ring and touched it to the glow. This time there was a spark. "Ah," Telemaine said in a satisfied tone. "I suspected as much." "Well, are you going to tell us about it?" Morwen said as she dropped a load of wizard staff in a pile against the wall. "It's a self-sustaining barrier produced by a recalculation of the initial power input," Telemaine explained. "Because of the rotation effect, the most physical substance cannot pass through the shield in either direction. Unlike the majority of spells, this one needs no exterior energy source, so the usual procedures for dismantling such sorceries would be completely ineffective." "What does that mean?" Cimmerian demanded. "The spell keeps itself up, we can't get in or out, and we don't have any way of getting rid of it," Morwen translated. "Then how did the cat get in?" Cimmerian asked, pointing at Morwen's large and silver cream cat, which had climbed onto Kazul's back and lay curled up between her wings. "Cats are like that," Morwen said. "When he comes out, I'll ask him how he did it if you want, but don't expect too much in the way of an answer. Cats enjoy being mysterious." "I don't care what they enjoy," Cimmerian said. "We have to get Kazul out of there, and if that cat can help—" "It's unlikely," Telemaine interrupted, stepping back from the glow. "The cat's method of moving through the barrier is, in all probability, useless to anyone else. Fortunately, we have other resources." "We do?" Telemaine looked at Mendibar. "While I have not had a chance to make a thorough and complete examination of that extremely intriguing weapon you carry, I have observed enough to determine that it is fundamentally antithetical to wizards and their magic. A straightforward penetration appears to be quite possible and would disrupt the recirculation effect, resulting in the collapse of the self-sustaining mechanism." "What?" said Cimmerian. "Really, Telemaine, must you?" said Morwen. "Right," said Mendenbar. He took 3 steps forward and stuck the sword into the glowing spell. A jolt of power ran up his arm, and the globe of light flashed brighter than the sun. Mendenbar's eyes were dazzled by the flare, so he couldn't see anything except for purple spots. But he heard a loud roar, the angry hiss of a cat, and the sound of scales on stone, so he was sure that the barrier was gone. "Kazul!" Submarine cried from behind him. "It's all right. It's not wizards. It's us." "And about time," a deep, unfamiliar voice said. "Hello, Submarine. Morwen, it's nice to see you again. Who are these others?" "This is Mendenbar, the king of the enchanted forest," Submarine answered, and Mendenbar felt her hand on his shoulder. "He's the one who let you out. Over there is Telemane. He's a magician, and he figured out how to do it." "Greetings, your majesty," Mendenbar said, blinking. The purple spots began to fade, and at last he found himself staring into the green-gold eyes of an enormous female dragon. He only just managed to keep himself from backing up automatically. "Pleased to meet you." "Under the circumstances, most definitely so am I," the dragon said, with a smile that showed off a large number of sharp-looking silver teeth. "How did you manage it?" "Weren't you watching?" Submarine asked. "Watching what?" Kazul replied. "Couldn't see anything except for what was inside that blasted bubble with me." "We could see you." "The shielding spell was unidirectional," Telemane put in. "The external absorptive effect would enhance its efficiency." Kazul gave Telemane a hard look and smiled, this time showing all of her teeth. "What was that again?" Telemane looked at Kazul. Then he looked at Mendenbar. He frowned in concentration, and finally he said carefully, "The shield was a one-way spell. Soaked up everything that tried to get in from the outside and used the energy to make it stronger." "Very good," said Morwen. "I was beginning to think that you were hopeless." "I haven't the slightest idea what you're talking about," Telemane said with dignity. A yowl of complaint made them all turn their heads. The cream and silver cat was standing at the edge of the wet, soapy, lemon-scented area where the wizards had melted, shaking his front paws one at a time and eyeing the water with extreme disfavor. "Too bad," Morwen told the cat. "If you hadn't snuck in and attracted their attention, Mendenbar might not have had to be quite so extravagant with the spray. You'll have to get it across yourself. Where's Chaos?" The cat blinked disdainfully and began washing its right paw. Kazul snorted. "If you want to ride, climb up," she told the cat, "but you better hurry, because I'm leaving now." Kazul rose to her feet, shaking her wings. The cat looked up from his washing and then took 2 bounds and leapt from the top of a projecting rock. He disappeared behind Kazul's shoulder, and there was a brief sound of claws scraping against scales. Then the cat appeared on Kazul's back, riding comfortably between the dragon's wings and looking tremendously pleased with himself. "Wait a minute," Mendenbar said as the dragon started towards the other end of the cave. "There may be more dragons out there." "Good," said Kazul without slowing down at all. 4 days is a long time to spend inside of a blank bubble, and I owe them one. Besides, I'm hungry." "I should think so," Submarine said, following the dragon. "Didn't they give you anything to eat?" "No, and I wouldn't have taken what they had," Kazul said. Her voice became muffled as her head turned the corner at the far end of the cave. "For all I knew, those mumbo could have dragon's bane and everything. End up like Tokas." "But if there are more wizards," Mendenbar began and then gave up and hurried after Submarine. Clearly, neither she nor Kazul was going to listen to him, and if there were more wizards outside, it would be better that he and his sword were there to help. That's where we're going to end today. We'll finish up the book tomorrow when we start with chapter 17, in which Mendenbar grows some trees and makes some wicked suggestions. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Sarah Mari. I'm one of the librarians at Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine, and we've been reading from Searching for Dragons by Patricia C. Wrede and published by Scholastic. See you tomorrow. Bye!